Many years ago, in the heart of Benin City, Nigeria, there lived a woman called Naomi. She was a young and beautiful lady who got married to her heartthrob in a union blessed with love, affection, and understanding. It was a union made in heaven. Naomi and her husband loved each other so much, but there was a problem. She was barren. For many years, she visited several hospitals to solve the infertility challenge and spent millions of naira consulting specialists, all to no avail. Naomi was exhausted and frustrated. She visited several spiritualists as well. She prayed and fasted endlessly. She desperately wanted a child, but she was never lucky to be pregnant. Her many visits to the hospital piqued the interest of several nurses and medical personnel who proffered multiple solutions to her travails. It included visiting a white garment prophet. "The demons after you are very strong," the prophet said. She knew this. There was no other way to explain her barrenness that was over 2 decades. "What can I do, sir? Please help me. Help me," she pleaded. He suggested that she do a spiritual cleansing. She would strip herself of all items of clothing while he bathes her naked in a river at midnight, and then she would be rid of the demons. She reluctantly did out of desperation and watched helplessly as the prophet groped her shamelessly while bathing her in the river. He was muttering prayers that were at best incantations. All the efforts yielded no result. She had done everything humanly possible to be pregnant, despite the embarrassment and humiliation. Pressure was mounting from her in-laws. She was greatly distressed. People described her with her travails. "Don't you remember that lady? The barren one?" a person trying to describe her would say. Banters like that became very rampant, causing her so much pain and hurt. She was greatly distraught. One day, in a strange turnaround of events, she noticed that she was consistently having morning sickness. Her hope of getting pregnant was lost, so she visited the hospital to get treated for malaria. The doctor referred her to the laboratory to get several tests done. As she walked down the aisle of the hospital approaching the laboratory, the scientist waved excitedly. She was very pleased to see her. She loved her genuinely. Naomi was a very gorgeous and personable woman. She exuded an aura everyone got caught up in. She was soft-spoken and kind. "Don't tell me you're sick. Why are you looking this way?" The laboratory scientist was eyeing her from head to toe and quickly received the prescription from the doctor. Naomi was handing to her. "Don't worry, dearie, you will be okay." Naomi simply nodded with thanks and got herself a seat. She was invited after a moment for the collection of her blood sample. The test was quickly done, and after some minutes, the laboratory scientist approached her with a smile. "You are pregnant," she whispered with a broad smile. Naomi immediately became dizzy. She was overwhelmed with joy. It was her first time to have received such news. She had never been pregnant. She had once begged God to at least let her experience a miscarriage, so she could know how it felt to be pregnant. She broke down in tears. The scientist quickly hugged her, and they both sobbed in each other's arms. She had been a part of her painful experiences. She nudged her to quickly go and see the doctor so she could be out of the hospital in good time. By the time she got out of his office, she met with the smiling eyes of all the nurses that heard the good news. They hugged and prayed for her. The antenatal session months later was a pleasant one for Naomi. She was a celebrity at the hospital. Whenever she sauntered in, there was a nurse to quickly help her with her bag and assist her with the hospital's process. They would tease her and make it an easy ride for her every time and give her a lot of candy and snacks. She was loved. It was the 3rd trimester and the expected date of delivery. Naomi was already feeling labor pains. Her husband drove her to the hospital with breakneck speed, anxiety, and a rush of adrenaline. He released her to the warmth and receiving hands of all the medical personnel. Everyone was scampering to get her all set up for the labor room. The labor was easy. By midnight, the screams of the newborn filled the labor room, and the medical personnel all burst into shouts of joy. Naomi gazed at her newborn and hugged him closely to her breasts. She swore to protect and love him with her life. She let the tears flow freely as she kissed her baby, who was now calm. It would seem like the smell of his mother and her heartbeat soothed him well. The hospital was agog once the news broke in the hall. Those who didn't know Naomi wondered what the ruse was about. The people were genuinely happy for her. They had all been a part of her travail. Her husband's joy knew no bounds. He tried to have a grip on himself as he made the calls to his family and in-laws, and bought all that was present at the hospital drinks. It was a party that night, but in a wicked, sudden twist of fate, the unthinkable and a most strange event took place. No one had ever seen or heard of such evil. Naomi visited the hospital with her newborn just before the naming ceremony for his immunization. Everyone at the hospital was very excited to see them both healthy. They hugged her and carried the baby briefly, praying and petting him. The baby wasn't having it. He was mostly cranky whenever anyone but his mother carried him. Naomi did not pay much attention to him, but she would wish she did. It was a bit stressful at the hospital because of the many patients who were there for the same reason. One of her friends at the hospital had taken her file and advised her to take a seat as she found a way to make the process seamless and less stressful for her. Moments later, she felt a sudden urge to pee. She tried to hold it back, but she could feel the stress on her bladder. She knew she couldn't take her baby along to the restroom and considered leaving her baby with a medical personnel, but he had been cranky. She thought at those moments to visit her friend, the laboratory scientist. She had not seen her since she gave birth and thought it was good to kill two birds with a stone. She would visit her friend and have her look after her baby until she was done. It was a good plan. Her baby began to cry inconsolably. They urged her to breastfeed him, but she was too hard-pressed to do so. She needed to use the restroom. Just in a corner of the hospital, as she proceeded to the laboratory, she saw her friend, the lab scientist. She was sauntering unbothered on the aisle. "Sister! Sister!" she called. She had never bothered to know her name as they simply referred to themselves as sisters. The lab scientist didn't respond, so Naomi ran after her. She was just the perfect person to help her carry her baby, as she desperately wanted to use the restroom. The lady turned as she nudged her on her shoulders and smiled. At this time, the baby was screaming uncontrollably. Naomi noticed the laboratory scientist wasn't her usual cheerful self, but she desperately needed to pee. "See my baby, didn't you hear I have given birth? I need to pee. I am coming," she said as she thrust her crying baby, wrapped in a shawl, on the woman and quickly dashed into the restroom. She could hear the baby cry into the distance briefly and then hushed as she hurriedly finished up. She was a lot relieved. She cleaned up after herself and went to the laboratory to find her friend. "Good morning. Please tell my sister to come over with my baby," she said to a person she met at the lab. "Who's your sister?" the personnel asked. "I am sorry, I have not bothered to ask for her name. I just refer to her as my sister. Are you new here?" The personnel responded in the affirmative, and Naomi smiled at her. Everyone knew her relationship with the laboratory scientist, so she could make sense of the personnel's ignorance. "Please, can you call any of your colleagues? I gave her my baby." The personnel reluctantly invited another staff member to attend to her, and she smiled pleasantly as she saw Naomi. "Mrs. Naomi, it's so good to see you. How are you and where is your baby?" she asked. Naomi was generous with her smile. "He's fine. I am here to pick him up," she said. "Your baby isn't here. Did you leave him here?" the personnel said, staring at her confused looks. "Number I gave her to my sister. I thought she brought him here." Now the staff was both confused and scared. "I am sorry, don't you know?" Naomi was getting very impatient. Her baby must be very cranky wherever he is. "Know what, please? Your sister is dead. She died some days after you gave birth." For a moment, Naomi froze. She felt like she was dreaming. "What did you say? Are you joking?" Her eyes were wide open. "I am sorry, sis. We all felt the same way. Mrs. Merriam is dead." No, she cannot be dead. You are mistaken. I saw her a few minutes ago and gave her my baby." The personnel was at a loss as Naomi zoomed off across the aisle in search of her baby. Some of the nurses noticed her confused and desperate search as she dashed into different corridors. They quickly approached her and asked what the problem was. "I am looking for my child. I cannot find my baby." The nurses were shocked. They all joined in on the frantic search. "Who did you give him to?" they asked, the laboratory scientist. "I saw her near the restroom and gave my baby to her." "Which one of them?" one of the nurses asked. "My sister, the one that mostly attends to patients." "No, it cannot be," the nurse exclaimed. "Mrs. Merriam, she is dead." "No, no, no, don't say that. I saw her and gave her my baby." At this moment, Naomi was screaming and wailing. The entire hospital was thrown into a frenzy, as nearly all the personnel were consoling, yet quizzing her. They all desperately needed more details to find the baby. At this point, Naomi was losing her sanity. They tried to convince her that her friend was dead, and she couldn't have been the one she gave her baby to. The more they did, the more grievous and violent she became. So they decided to take her to the morgue. It was the most chilling and dreadful sight. As they got into the morgue and pulled the white piece of clothing over the corpse of her friend, Mrs. Merriam, on her chest was Naomi's baby lying motionless. Naomi passed out. The nurses grabbed the baby from the corpse and did everything to resuscitate the child. It was a strange and very sad twist of event. The child was dead. Naomi would remain in a coma for several months after that uncanny episode. To date, patients are filled with horror by the very strange and tragic story of Sister Naomi at the hospital. The end. Do you think this story is fact or fiction? Let me know in the comment section. Meanwhile, if you enjoyed it, kindly subscribe, like, and share. See you in the next video.